And so I've been listening to some Sam Harris podcasts and watched some interviews with him. And interesting guy. And I'd love to have him on the podcast at some point. I think we'd have very interesting conversation. Because I don't agree with a lot of what he's saying, but I certainly respect him. And, and I may be wrong, and he would be the guy to tell me when I am. But one of the things I've been hearing is his most recent podcast is where he's reading from a publication put out by, I think it's ISIS or Al Qaeda, I don't know. And there's this essay in there about why we hate you in the West. And so he's reading from that, and the whole podcast, I think it's 45 minutes, is just him sort of, holding up this publication as evidence in support of his contention that Islam is inherently evil and we need to eliminate these groups militarily as soon as possible by whatever means are necessary. And that anyone who makes the argument that the United States is in any sense partially responsible for this is being naive and ignoring the evidence that's right in front of us. I guess to me that sort of feels like, like he's a guy who's so focused on putting out a fire that he thinks any discussion of what started the fire or what fuels it is just complete foolishness. It's fine to make the point that these jihadists that he's quoting are clearly in a war against the West, but it doesn't then follow that this war wasn't sparked and fueled by decades of U.S. and British foreign policy that's resulted in generations of humiliated and unemployed men, horribly oppressive regimes like the Shah of Iran, the Saudis, the Pakistanis, all of whom, by the way, were created, trained, armed, and funded by the U.S. A huge transfer of wealth out of the Middle East to the West by way of these torturing regimes that we put into position all over the region so that we could have easy access to the oil and get it out of the country without having to pay free market prices for it. And, these are people who send their kids to Western universities. If they get sick, they come to Western hospitals. They're completely separated from their citizenry. So it's just colonialism. Back in the old days, the British installed their own people to run the show. Now what we do is we cultivate people within the country who have more allegiance to the West than they do to their own people, and we fund them and send them arms and teach them how to torture, and that's how we do colonialism now. And we say, well, we're not there, it's not us, it's that's the Shah of Iran, that's the Saud family. The Saud family was nothing until the British and the Americans created them and created that false state. And then there's the whole question of Israel and the occupation of land that we can argue who has a right to it, but nobody, I think, would try to argue that that hasn't been a complete disaster in terms of relations between the West and people of the Middle East. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I agree with some of what Sam Harris is saying about the state of Islam at this moment and the intentions of the jihadis and the nature of the jihad that they're waging. But I think that it's disingenuous to ignore the source of these things and to ignore the historical context in which this fire erupted. And it's not legitimate to say we can't talk about what caused the fire or what's fueling the fire. We just need to put out the fire because, as any fireman will tell you, you got to know what kind of fire it is to know how to put it out. You don't throw water on an oil fire. And if there's ever an oil fire, this is it. Just yesterday, there was a story in the New York Times about 40 innocent people who were killed in Yemen by bombs that were dropped from U.S. jets. The bombs are U.S. made. They're flown by U.S. trained pilots. They're Saudis, but what's the difference, right? The people who are killed, they see USA on the bomb fragments. They see American-built jets flying over and dropping the bombs, and they know that the guys inside those jets came and trained in the U.S., or the U.S. pilots went to Saudi Arabia and taught them how to do this. So as far as they're concerned, they're being killed by America. That's not even counting all the fucking people who are being killed by the drones that are blowing up all over the place. Now, the Saudis, by the way, they bombed a hospital run by Doctors Without Borders, a school, and a potato chip factory. So what the fuck's going on there, right? And this is the kind of stuff that's been going on for decades in the Middle East and Latin America. If you don't know about this stuff, really, it's worth educating yourself, because if you don't know what American foreign policy has been and you just think like we're out there defending freedom, then you're really missing it. You really don't know what's going on, because what's going on is neocolonialism. It's been going on for a long time, and they don't hate us for our freedoms. This is what Sam Harris is saying. They hate us for our freedoms. What George Bush said and everyone laughed at is true. And again, yes, right now, what that magazine is saying, what the author of that essay that Sam Harris was reading is saying, yes, that's true. But to ignore the context, to ignore where this comes from is, I think, disingenuous. And so anyway, I would love to talk with him about it. Maybe when I'm in the States, I'll try to get in touch with him and see if we can sit down together and talk about these things, because he does seem like someone that you can disagree with respectfully. And I certainly have a lot of respect for the guy. Okay, I'm going to play you out or in. I tried to say out and in at the same time there.